My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 32, and tonight I'm cradling a mug of peppermint tea in our Seattle kitchen while my daughter sleeps peacefully in the next room. But exactly 1 year ago, I was standing in a banquet hall in Houston, heart-pounding vision tunneling as my father raised his crystal glass and said, "My true children are the ones who made me proud." Then he looked directly at me, his voice slicing through the applause. "You can leave!" For a split second, I thought I'd imagined it. A cruel, impossible hallucination. But the room fell quiet. Dozens of eyes turned in my direction. The air thickened with confusion and judgment. My fingers curled around the edge of the table knuckles, white. Every instinct screamed at me to disappear. And just when I thought I might crumble completely, Daniel stood up beside me. Before I can continue my story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far this story travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. My father, Edward Morgan, had just retired after 40 years at Aerodyne Systems, one of Houston's biggest aerospace giants. The celebration was grand, of course, held at the Lancaster downtown, with its velvet chairs and gold-trimmed chandeliers. It had the sterile gloss of money and legacy of generational pride, curated for an audience. But beneath the prestige, our family had long since splintered along invisible lines. That night simply made the fracture public. We were seated at a table far from the main one. Natalie, my sister, was glowing in red silk, her surgeon fiancé by her side. Bradley, my brother, held court in his designer suit, laughing with some Wall Street connection. Daniel and I were tucked near the waitstaff's entrance with a few second-tier guests, and a great-uncle I hadn't seen since high school. At dinner, no one asked about Harborlight Books, the small literary press Daniel and I had built from scratch. No one mentioned the award we'd won, or the author we'd just signed for a Netflix deal. To them, we were Rachel and her little hobby. We weren't invited to toast or speak or even share a memory. Still, I stayed. I tried. I wanted to believe my presence mattered, that after everything my father might acknowledge me. But instead, in the middle of his speech, after praising Natalie's unrelenting discipline and Bradley's entrepreneurial brilliance, he thanked the children who reflect my values. Then casually he dismissed me. "You can leave." And in that breathless silence, my chair scraping back, Daniel stood. Not out of obligation, not in anger, but out of something deeper love that didn't need permission. I remember the faint clink of his water glass, the subtle chime that followed. A small sound, yet it cracked the tension like thunder. People turned toward him, puzzled. My father stiffened, but Daniel didn't flinch. He looked my father in the eye and said, "I'd like to make a toast." It was the moment that split my life into before and after. The moment I stopped begging to be seen and started seeing myself. My childhood home sat neatly behind a wrought iron gate in River Oaks, one of Houston's oldest and wealthiest neighborhoods. From the outside, it looked like something out of Architectural Digest brick facade ivy, framing the windows, manicured hedges, trimmed to military precision. But inside love was itemized and conditional. Feelings were things to be managed, not expressed. Success was not celebrated, it was assumed. My father, Edward Morgan, was the kind of man who believed in stoicism as a virtue and sentiment as weakness. He rose through the ranks of Aerodyne, not by charm or charisma, but through cold calculation and tireless work. At home, he applied the same principles. My siblings thrived under the pressure, at least on the surface. Bradley, the eldest, mirrored my father in every way, strategic, detached, performative. Natalie was a perfectionist surgeon in the making before she'd even finished high school. Her resume read like a battle plan. Then there was me. I was the youngest, the one who colored outside the lines quite literally. I preferred library books to flashcards painted on the garage walls, memorized entire poems, and performed them in the living room like monologues. I got A's, but not in the right subjects. Honors English wasn't impressive in our house, unless it came with a dual degree in mechanical engineering. I remember once in 9th grade, I won a statewide creative writing competition. I told my dad at dinner, sliding the certificate across the table like it might impress him. He didn't look up from his steak, "Is there a cash prize?" he asked, dabbing his mouth with a cloth napkin. "No," I said quietly, "just recognition." He shrugged. "Then it's a distraction." My mother, Diane, reached for my hand under the table, her silent apology. She was gentle in a way he never was, her affection quiet but real. She'd leave notes in my lunchbox, handwrite birthday cards, with long paragraphs of encouragement. But her warmth never stood a chance against his chill. By the time I turned 17, she was already fighting ovarian cancer. I used to sit with her during chemo reading aloud from Jane Austen, and later from my own notebooks. She said my words helped the pain recede. I clung to that, even when everything else felt like it was falling away. When she died during my junior year at Rice, I came home to a silent house. My father never cried. He just poured scotch into a glass, sat at his desk, and didn't speak to me for 3 days. After that, it was as if she'd been deleted. Her paintings taken down her laugh, replaced by the quiet vacuum of grief wrapped in ambition. That was the moment I understood what kind of family I belonged to. A family that didn't mourn, but reorganized. My siblings threw themselves back into work, and my father into networking events and board appointments. I finished my literature degree without help working 2 jobs and surviving on caffeine poetry, and the fragile hope that if I built something meaningful one day, he might see me differently. But that hope was a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying until it crushed me at that retirement dinner. I was 12 when I first learned that one mistake could sever the invisible thread holding my father's approval in place. It was my birthday recital, something my mom had organized with care-stringing fairy lights in the living room, setting out lemonade in fancy glasses, inviting neighbors and my piano teacher. I wore a pale blue dress with a satin ribbon and practiced Clair de Lune for weeks. Not because I loved it, I did, but that wasn't the reason. I wanted to get it perfect for him. He sat in the middle of the front row, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The room was warm from so many people. My fingers trembled as I placed them on the keys. The first few phrases flowed fine, but midway through the second section, I slipped barely a note off, but enough. Enough for him to shift. I saw him straighten his tie, rise slowly, and walk out the front door. No words, no correction, just his back disappearing through the frame. At first, I thought he might be coming back. Bathroom phone call, something, anything else. But the longer I played, the more it became clear he had left on purpose. I finished the piece through a blur of tears, each note landing like a question. Why wasn't I enough? That night, I cried into my pillow, my mother rubbing gentle circles into my back. He had a long day, she murmured. It wasn't about you. But that's the thing, everything always was about me. Or rather, the parts of me he didn't like. Too sensitive, too artistic, too soft. He wanted a daughter who calculated, not created. A daughter who could command numbers the way I commanded sentences. That single note became a metaphor in my mind. Any small slip, any deviation from the expected, would cost me love. From then on, I learned to over-prepare, to apologize in advance, to read a room faster than most adults. My goal wasn't to shine. It was not to disappoint. The mistake at the piano followed me into college. I agonized over every class presentation, second-guessed every relationship. Even my successes felt like borrowed clothes, attractive, but not really mine. I didn't trust good things to last because experience had taught me that approval was temporary, conditional. In the few relationships I had before Daniel, I always overcompensated. I made myself small, chosen for my loyalty, not my voice. If a man raised his voice, I folded. If he withdrew, I assumed it was my fault. I didn't ask for more. I didn't think I deserved more. The ghost of that unfinished birthday loomed over every moment of celebration. Even at my college graduation, where I wore cords and a medal, I scanned the crowd for my father. He hadn't come. I had a conflict, he said later on the phone, as if a daughter's milestone was interchangeable with a quarterly board review. It took me years to stop believing that he was right, that I was just less. Years to realize that I didn't need to be more to be loved. I just needed someone who saw me. It happened in a narrow cedar-scented bookstore in downtown Seattle. The kind of place with squeaky wooden floors and handwritten staff recommendations tucked into the shelves. I had come for quiet, but also for a particular edition of Jane Eyre, a cloth-bound copy I'd seen once and regretted not buying. I found it on the very top shelf in the classics section. Just as I reached for it, another hand did too. Warm fingers brushed mine. I looked up into a pair of curious, kind eyes. "You go ahead," he said with a small smile. "Anyone who looks that determined to get Bronte probably needs her more than I do." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. His name was Daniel. He was an engineer, but said he came to bookstores when the world felt too mechanical. I told him I came when it felt too cold. We ended up at the cafe next door, talking until the barista kicked us out at closing. Literature was the surface, but what really connected us was the way he listened, not like he was waiting for his turn to speak, but like every word mattered. He didn't flinch when I mentioned my family didn't try to fix anything. He just said, "Sounds like you've carried a lot. Doesn't mean you have to keep carrying it." At first, I thought the kindness had a shelf life. I tested it in small ways. I flinched if I forgot to text back right away. I apologized too much. I waited for him to withdraw. But he never did. Instead, he asked questions. What did I want to do, really? What would I build if no one else's opinion mattered? I told him my dream, a small publishing house for debut authors, especially those who didn't have a foot in the door. First-time voices overlooked communities' literary fiction that didn't chase trends. A place where people like me could tell their stories and be seen. Daniel didn't laugh. He asked how much startup capital I thought I'd need, what my first-year list would look like. He built spreadsheets the way I built plot lines. 6 months later, Harborlight Books launched in a subleased corner office with 2 second-hand desks, 3 authors, and a coffee machine that never worked right. Our logo was hand-sketched by a former client of mine who had aged out of foster care. That was the point. We were a lighthouse, not a spotlight. We published stories that didn't scream but still deserved to be heard. Year 1, we broke even. Year 2, we made a modest profit. Year 3, one of our titles won a Pacific Northwest Indie Book Award. And by the 4th year, we were optioning a manuscript to Netflix. It still didn't make me rich, but it made me whole. Daniel and I got married under cherry blossoms in Volunteer Park, surrounded by the writers, artists, and misfits who had become our chosen family. My father sent nothing. Bradley didn't reply to the invitation. Natalie sent a card with a typed message and a check I never cashed. But none of that mattered that day. For once, I wasn't performing. I was present. And Daniel whispered as we danced under the string lights, "You're not too much. You were never too much." We signed the lease on Harborlight's new office space in the heart of Capitol Hill, a creaky old brick building with ivy winding through its windows and the scent of dust and cedar embedded in the woodwork. There was no front desk, just a bell that chimed when you opened the door. I loved it instantly. It felt like a place that believed in stories. By then, we had published 9 books. Not many by industry standards, but everyone mattered. We worked with immigrant writers, veterans, and young authors who didn't fit mainstream molds. Some of our manuscripts arrived with typos and tears. Others came in perfect Chicago style, but had been ignored by big houses for being too quiet. We made room for the quiet. When we launched our literacy outreach program, Books for Light, we donated copies to Title I schools across Houston, Dallas, and Austin. It was my way of reaching back into a childhood I hadn't yet fully healed from. If I could place even one book into the hands of a kid who felt invisible, maybe I could rewrite something for both of us. Daniel handled the back-end finances, shipping contracts. I curated submissions and worked with the authors. I got to do what I loved with someone who respected my voice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission. And yet when the invitation came to my father's retirement party, I froze. Thick cardstock, gold-embossed lettering. The Lancaster Hotel. "I can't tell if this is an olive branch or a power play," I said, standing at the kitchen counter, holding the envelope like it might detonate. "Could be both," Daniel replied, slicing a tomato for dinner. "We don't have to go." But part of me still ached with that childlike hope. Maybe this time he'd see me. Maybe retirement had softened him. Maybe he'd say something human. "He's not going to change," Daniel reminded me, gently reading my silence. "I know," I said, "but I have." The night before we flew to Houston, I couldn't sleep. My brain spiraled with old voices, my father's disappointment, my mother's whispered reassurances, even Natalie's mocking tone when I wore the same dress twice. At 3 in the morning, I got up and stood in the Harborlight office surrounded by shelves of our books. Books we'd midwifed into the world. Real stories, real proof. I took one copy of each and packed them in a gift bag, along with a fountain pen I knew my father would admire. I even attached a handwritten note. For your next chapter, from the daughter you never quite understood. I didn't expect it to be received well, but I needed to reclaim my place. Not as a performer, but as a person. I didn't need to win him over. I just needed to stop disappearing. Daniel and I flew to Houston the next morning. As we drove through River Oaks toward the hotel, the trees arched overhead like sentries. I felt like a tourist in the place that raised me. The homes were bigger than I remembered, the gates taller. But inside the car, Daniel reached over, laced his fingers through mine, and said, "Whatever happens tonight, you walk out with your head high." Okay? I nodded, even though my stomach twisted in knots, because I knew what I was walking into, and I still went. The Lancaster looked exactly as I remembered. Elegant, symmetrical, and cold. Gold fixtures. Tall white lilies. Waitstaff gliding through the marble atrium with practiced discretion. We stepped through the revolving doors, Daniel in a dark suit, me in a midnight blue dress I'd rented for the occasion. I had my hair swept up a pearl pin borrowed from a friend. I felt armored like I'd prepared for battle disguised as celebration. The maitre d' guided us to the Morgan retirement celebration in the upstairs ballroom. A grand chandelier bathed the space in golden light, bouncing off champagne flutes and polished shoes. There were maybe 80 people there, banking executives, aerospace colleagues, old family friends. The kind of crowd that says legacy with every tailored lapel and practiced laugh. Rachel, my brother Bradley, spotted me first. He raised his glass but didn't approach. "Didn't expect to see you." A greeting that said everything and nothing. Natalie stood near the center, gleaming in crimson satin, her fiancé beside her quietly name-dropping Mayo Clinic. She caught sight of me, eyes sweeping over my dress, with the same critique she used to reserve for my handwriting and birthday cards. "You came," she said, voice neutral. "Of course I did," I replied. "It's Dad's big night." "Just don't make it about you," she added with a tight smile, then turned back to the guests she'd been entertaining. I turned to Daniel, who raised an eyebrow. "Charming as always," he murmured. "Think we're seated near the exit." I chuckled, but my stomach was tightening. When we reached our table, the joke became prophecy. We were seated near the far wall, flanked by extended family and junior colleagues I barely recognized. The main table closest to the podium belonged to the stars, my father, Natalie Bradley, their partners, and a few key executives from Aerodyne. I couldn't pretend it was a mistake. My last name was Morgan, just like theirs. But clearly, I didn't belong at the legacy table. I sipped sparkling water and tried to focus on Daniel's calm voice, on the tiny bites of seared scallop the servers placed in front of us. Around us, conversations buzzed about private schools, sailboats, and someone's recent ski trip to Banff. No one asked about Harborlight. No one even asked what I did. It was like being 13 again at my father's corporate picnic, everyone talking stocks and sales, while I read Wuthering Heights under the catering table. Then, I'd at least had my mother's knowing glance, her small smile across the lawn. But now she was gone, and all I had was Daniel's hand resting gently on my knee. "I shouldn't have come," I whispered. "Yes, you should have," he said. "Even if it's just to witness what you've outgrown." When dinner ended, the CEO of Aerodyne stood to toast my father. Words like visionary, steadfast, and pillar floated through the room. Then, Bradley gave a speech about financial inheritance and carrying the family torch. Natalie followed, her voice syrupy, describing our father's unrelenting standards as if they were gifts. And then Edward Morgan rose. He adjusted his cufflinks, looked around the room like a monarch surveying his kingdom, and with a gracious smile he said, "My true legacy is here tonight, reflected in the children who carry my values forward with pride and precision." He raised his glass toward the main table. Then, slowly, his gaze found me across the room. "You can leave." No explanation, no anger, just dismissal polished like marble. And suddenly, all the air was gone from the room. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain refused to translate the words. "You can leave," he'd said without raising his voice, without any sign of emotion, like a manager excusing an underperforming intern from a boardroom. Chairs creaked. Forks paused midair. Across the room, heads began to swivel. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as it dawned on everyone what had just happened. I was being cast out publicly, cleanly surgically. A daughter removed from her father's narrative. Daniel stood. The scrape of his chair was crisp, deliberate, louder than it needed to be. He didn't look at me, he looked at Edward. My father's jaw clenched. His brows narrowed. This wasn't part of the script. "Sit down," he said quietly, not a request, but a command. Daniel didn't. Instead, he picked up his water glass and tapped it gently with his spoon. The delicate ping echoed through the room like a starting pistol. "I'd like to make a toast," Daniel said. The crowd froze. Anxious glances darted from my father to Daniel and back again. I could feel the blood roaring in my ears. I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew it would change everything. "If Richard has shared his legacy," Daniel said, his voice steady, "then I'd like to share the truth about the daughter he just told to leave." A few gasps. A cough somewhere near the back. My father shifted uncomfortably. 3 years ago, Rachel launched a publishing company with no seed money, no family support, and no industry connections. Just a vision and relentless work. Harborlight Books has published stories by immigrant women veterans and first-generation college students, people this world often overlooks. Someone at the VIP table whispered, "Is that true?" Daniel continued unflinching. "Last year, one of their titles won a regional award. Last month, another was optioned by Netflix. You wouldn't know this, Richard, because you've never asked. You've never asked her about anything that mattered." He paused. "When Rachel was 21, she took a leave from Rice to care for her mother during chemo. She read to her every night, bathed her, held her hand through morphine tremors. When Diane passed, Rachel stayed alone in that house for 3 days because you were too busy managing quarterly forecasts. A hush had blanketed the room. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving." Daniel turned to face the guests. "She used her college savings to cover her brother Bradley's failed startup debt. Never told a soul, never expected thanks. And Natalie. When you were scrambling to finish med school rotations, Rachel edited your residency essays at 2 a.m. while holding down a full-time job." My siblings stared ahead. My father looked carved from stone. Daniel's voice softened. "Rachel isn't just a good daughter. She's a better human being than this room deserves." He raised his glass. "To the woman my father never bothered to know. The woman who loved, created, sacrificed, and was still told to leave." He looked directly at Edward. "So thank you, Richard, for showing us what legacy isn't." He set the glass down with finality and reached for my hand. Every eye followed us as we walked, heads turning like flowers chasing light. I didn't cry. I didn't stumble. We didn't belong there anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't ashamed of that. We didn't speak in the elevator. Daniel kept his hand in my thumb, brushing over my knuckles, the only movement between us. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching myself from above heels, clicking against marble heart, echoing in my ears. The farther we got from the ballroom, the easier it was to breathe. Outside, the humid Houston night wrapped around us like a damp curtain. The valet averted his eyes as he rushed to retrieve our rental car. I watched his hands tremble slightly as he opened the door for me. He'd heard the toast. Everyone had. When we got back to our hotel, I collapsed on the edge of the bed, still in my dress. Daniel sat beside me, quietly removing my shoes, like I was a statue he was afraid might crack. Then I did. I sobbed loud, open, unrestrained. Years of trying, years of shrinking, all undone in one evening. It was the kind of crying that left me breathless, guttural. I apologized through hiccups, my body shaking like it was trying to eject every hurt it had ever stored. "I'm sorry you had to do that," I gasped. "I'm not," Daniel said. "I've wanted to say those things for 3 years. I just didn't think I'd do it in a room full of billionaires with lobster claws in their mouths." That made me laugh unexpectedly through my tears. A jagged, messy sound. We stayed up until nearly 3 talking. About grief. About patterns. About how even after that public rejection, I still found myself craving the next call, the next crumb of acceptance. Daniel didn't judge me for it. He just listened, arms around me, steady as ever. The next morning, my phone held 6 missed calls from my father. 4 voicemails, all of them terse, angry, escalating. "You've humiliated me. You've crossed a line. You will regret this." Then Kimberly's text, "Dad's retirement was not the place for one of your moments." You never could stand anyone else having the spotlight. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I deleted it. That afternoon while packing, I accidentally knocked our wedding photo off the dresser. The frame cracked in two places, the glass splintering, but the photo itself unharmed. I knelt and carefully pried the glass away, holding the image in my hands. Daniel and I were laughing cake on our noses, eyes locked, like we were the only people in the world. The frame broke, I said softly. But we didn't, he replied from behind me. Back in Seattle, I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Evelyn Brooks. Her online bio mentioned trauma-informed care and family dynamics. Her eyes in the profile photo were kind but sharp. She didn't look like someone who'd nod through polite lies. I don't know where to start, I told her during our first session. Start anywhere, she said, wherever the pain is loudest. We spent our sessions excavating memories I hadn't dared revisit. The recital, the ignored graduation, the long hours in the hospital, the quiet hurt of Natalie's condescension, of Bradley's silence, of my father's cold precision. You describe emotional abuse, Dr. Brooks said carefully. You were trained to earn love. That's not love. The words hit like a bell rung too close to my ear. I wasn't weak, I'd just adapted. And now it was time to unlearn. Healing, I quickly learned, doesn't feel like healing. It feels like unraveling. There were days when I would sit at my desk at Harborlight and forget how to answer a simple email. Afternoons when I'd burst into tears while shelving new arrivals. Evenings when I stared at a blank document, fingers hovering, heart galloping, unable to write a single sentence. But there were also moments, small, quiet victories. A morning when I laughed out loud at a podcast. A night when Daniel and I slow danced in the kitchen, barefoot mid-dinner prep. A letter from one of our authors thanking me for taking a risk on her story. She called Harborlight the first place that had made her feel legit. Those moments began to string together like a thread. One day, while dusting the shelves in our office, I found a forgotten copy of Jane Eyre, the same edition Daniel and I had reached for the day we met. I sat on the floor and read the first page aloud, my voice surprisingly steady. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. I cried again, but this time the tears didn't burn. They cleansed. Meanwhile, the fallout from the retirement dinner continued to ripple across our family. Bradley called. Twice. I let the first one go to voicemail. The second time I answered. I don't know what to say, he began. You could start with thank you, I said. For the time I emptied my savings so you wouldn't get evicted. Long pause. Then I never asked for that. No, I said, you just expected it. He was quiet. And then finally, I'm sorry, Rachel. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I've been thinking about what Daniel said, about how we turned a blind eye. He was right. It didn't fix everything, but it mattered. Natalie predictably stayed silent. Her wedding invitation arrived 3 months later, addressed only to Daniel. A post-it inside read, "Please don't bring drama. We're keeping things elegant." We sent back a generic congratulations card and a set of non-stick pans from their registry. But Aunt Carolyn surprised me. She called one evening, her voice quieter than I remembered. "What your father did was inexcusable," she said. "But I enabled him for years. I told myself it was his way of protecting you, of toughening you up." "It didn't feel protective," I said. "I know. That's why I'm calling. I found something." She arrived a week later with a manila envelope filled with old photographs. My mother pregnant with me. My father holding me as a toddler, smiling. A fishing trip I barely remembered, my father crouched beside me, hands guiding mine on the rod. "He loved you once," Carolyn said. Then something in him hardened. I think losing Diane broke the part of him that could feel. I didn't cry this time. I felt compassion. Not forgiveness, but a softening. Grief, I was learning, doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes with perspective. A month later, Jason, our editor, asked if I'd be interested in speaking at a literary panel on healing through memoir. I hesitated, then said yes. That night, I stood before a packed bookstore talking about silence erasure and reclamation. My voice didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I didn't picture my father sitting in judgment. Instead, I pictured a lighthouse. And I realized it wasn't just the name of our press. It was what I had become. The night Lily was born, Seattle was washed in rain, the kind that taps gently at the window like a question. The hospital lights were soft, The nurse is kind, and Daniel's hand never left mine, not during the long hours of labor, not when I screamed, not when I cried from exhaustion, not even when I fell silent with awe, the moment she was placed on my chest. She was tiny and perfect. Her fingers curled instinctively around my pinky, as if claiming me, as if telling me I belonged to her now, and she to me. And just like that, my life split open again this time, not from pain, but from something almost holy. Love. Not the love I had fought to earn all my life. Not the love that measured itself in praise or pedigree. This was different. This was immediate. This was absolute. Daniel kissed my forehead and whispered, "She's got your eyes." Later, after the nurses left and Lily slept against my skin, I stared at her peaceful face and made a silent promise, "You will never have to prove your worth to me. Not once. Not ever." 2 weeks after her birth, a package arrived. No return address, just familiar handwriting. Inside a photo of me as a baby, asleep on my father's chest. On the back, she reminds me of you. Congratulations. No signature. But I knew who had sent it. I didn't cry. I didn't call. Instead, I tucked the photo into Lily's keepsake box. Not as a symbol of reconciliation, but as proof of lineage. A complicated inheritance she might one day ask about. When she does, I'll tell her the truth. The hard parts, the bright parts, and the reason we chose something different. Our house in Seattle smells like lemon balm and old paper. There are books in every room. Harborlight now prints 12 titles a year. We started a new imprint dedicated to memoirs about family healing and identity. It's our best reviewed line. Bradley and I talk monthly now. Not close, not easy, but real. Natalie and I remain oceans apart. Aunt Carolyn visits often, and she brings lemon scones and stories about my mother I'd never heard before. As for my father, I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't blocked him, but I no longer wait for a call. Lily is 5 months old now. She laughs when Daniel makes a whale noise, and she quiets when I hum Debussy. Sometimes in the early morning, when the world is still, I rock her in the old wooden chair Daniel refinished, and I feel something in my chest, something soft, something whole. The frame broke, but we didn't. I didn't. A year ago, I walked out of a ballroom where I was publicly rejected by the man who raised me. I thought that moment would destroy me, but it became the beginning of everything that matters: truth, freedom, and a life rooted in real love. I'm no longer the girl waiting for her father's approval. I'm a mother, a builder, a voice for others who were once silenced. The legacy I leave will not be measured in applause, but in authenticity. And Lily, she will grow up knowing she is enough exactly as she is. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you once begged to see you? Who was your Daniel when you couldn't stand on your own? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone else, navigating the wreckage of conditional love. You are not alone. You are enough.